Lately, money might feel different to you. Not in a dramatic way, not as a crisis, but different enough that ignoring it would feel slightly dishonest. You're still doing the same things. The numbers might even look similar, but the way money feels in your body, in your thoughts, in the background of your life, something has shifted. You may have noticed moments where old reactions don't show up the same way anymore. Situations that used to trigger urgency or tension now feel strangely muted. Or the opposite. Things that once felt neutral now carry a subtle weight, like your system is paying closer attention. Not with fear, with awareness. This isn't about having more or less money. It's not about luck, markets, or timing. It's about perception. And perception doesn't change loudly. It changes quietly, often before the mind can catch up. There's often a moment when people start to sense that money is no longer just an external object moving in and out of their lives. It begins to feel relational, responsive, almost like it's reflecting something internal rather than responding to effort alone. That realization doesn't arrive as excitement, it arrives as stillness. You might feel less rushed but more alert, less attached to outcomes, yet more intentional about choices. Old habits around money don't feel wrong, but they feel outdated, like wearing a version of yourself that no longer fits properly. What makes this confusing is that nothing obvious announces the change. There's no clear before and after, just a growing sense that the way you engage with money is being reorganized from the inside out. And when that happens, the nervous system notices before the conscious mind does. So if money feels different lately, it doesn't mean something is going wrong. It also doesn't automatically mean something is going right. It means something is shifting. Something subtle, but foundational. And the meaning of that shift isn't something to rush into understanding. For now, it's enough to notice that the old emotional charge around money may be loosening or changing shape, and that awareness itself is not accidental. When a shift like this begins, most people try to interpret it too quickly. They look for a cause outside themselves, a change in income, a new opportunity, a hidden threat. But what's actually happening lives deeper than circumstance. This phase often begins as an identity adjustment, not a financial one. The part of you that relates to money is recalibrating. And identity changes don't announce themselves with clarity. They show up as subtle discomforts, pauses, and moments where your old way of operating feels slightly misaligned. You might notice that urgency doesn't motivate you the way it used to. Pushing harder feels ineffective, almost noisy. At the same time, there's no panic. Just a quiet sense that forcing outcomes is no longer compatible with where you are internally. This can feel unsettling, especially if urgency once gave you a sense of control. When that familiar pressure fades, it leaves space. And space can feel like uncertainty before it feels like freedom. What's actually shifting is your internal relationship with safety and timing. Money stops feeling like something you have to chase or defend against. It begins to feel like something that responds to clarity rather than effort alone. You may also notice changes in how you make decisions, not dramatic ones, smaller choices. What you say yes to, what you delay, what you no longer feel compelled to prove. These decisions don't come from confidence in the traditional sense. They come from regulation. A regulated nervous system doesn't rush toward money, and it doesn't freeze around it either. It observes, it responds, and that shift alone changes how money moves in your life, even before results are visible. This is why the change feels calm, not urgent. Calm doesn't mean passive. It means your system is no longer operating from threat. And when threat dissolves, perception sharpens. You start noticing patterns you couldn't see before, where energy was leaking, where effort was compensating for misalignment, where money was being used to soothe something emotional rather than support something structural. At this stage, it's common to feel slightly out of sync with your old goals. Not because they were wrong, but because they were formed by an earlier version of you, a version that needed different things from money than you do now. Nothing needs to be resolved yet. This phase isn't about answers. It's about allowing the internal realignment to stabilize before you assign meaning to it. And that patience is not accidental. It's part of the shift itself. You may begin to notice that your relationship with time itself starts to change alongside your relationship with money. Deadlines still exist, responsibilities remain, but internally, time feels less like pressure and more like rhythm. You sense when something is early, when something is late, when something is simply not ready yet. This sensitivity isn't intellectual, it's somatic. It lives in the body before it becomes a thought. And because of that, you stop forcing decisions just to relieve discomfort. You allow them to form. This is where many people feel confused. From the outside, it may look like hesitation, but internally, it feels like restraint. A conscious refusal to move from the same internal state that created previous cycles. Money has always responded to internal states more than strategies. Strategies matter, but they amplify whatever state they're built on. When urgency builds strategies, they create volatility. When clarity builds strategies, they create coherence. As your internal baseline stabilizes, you may notice fewer emotional spikes around money. Less excitement, less dread, less fantasy. And while that might feel unfamiliar at first, it's actually a sign of maturation. Mature money energy is quiet. It doesn't need constant stimulation. It doesn't rely on hope or fear to stay in motion. You might also notice that your tolerance for misalignment decreases. Situations that once felt good enough begin to feel subtly draining. Not dramatic enough to demand action, but persistent enough to demand honesty. And honesty changes everything. You begin to ask different questions. Not, how fast can this work? But, what kind of relationship am I building with this? Not, will this pay off? But, what does this reinforce in me? These questions don't slow progress. They refine it. At the nervous system level, something important is happening. You're no longer using money as a signal of safety. Safety is being sourced internally. And when safety is internal, money no longer needs to perform emotional labor. That frees it. This is why alignment often precedes expansion. The system must feel safe enough to hold more without gripping it too tightly or pushing it away unconsciously. You may notice moments where you feel neutral around outcomes that once felt significant. This neutrality is not indifference, it's capacity. It means your system can now hold variability without collapsing into reaction. And that capacity is what allows money to circulate rather than stagnate. As this continues, you may also feel a subtle shift in self-trust. Not confidence in a motivational sense, but trust in your perception. Trust that when something feels off, it probably is. And when something feels aligned, it doesn't need justification. This trust doesn't make decisions easier. It makes them cleaner. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop overriding signals. You stop needing permission to slow down or recalibrate. And slowly, very slowly, money stops feeling like something that happens to you. It begins to feel like something you participate in consciously. At this point, many people notice a subtle change in how they experience choice. Not just financial choice, but choice itself. Decisions feel less like pressure points and more like invitations. You're not being pushed toward them. You're being met by them. This shift matters because money has always been tied to how we experience choice. When choice feels threatening, money feels heavy. When choice feels grounded, money feels workable. You may notice that you're less interested in reacting quickly just to feel relief. Speed no longer equals safety. And because of that, you begin to tolerate ambiguity with more ease. Not because you enjoy it, but because it no longer overwhelms your system. This tolerance is not passive, it's active stability. Stability allows you to stay present when outcomes are unclear. It allows you to remain engaged without tightening, and that internal posture changes the entire texture of your financial life. You begin to recognize how often money decisions in the past were attempts to resolve internal discomfort rather than responses to external reality. The urgency wasn't about opportunity. It was about regulation. Now, regulation is happening internally. This is why you may feel less reactive to both risk and reward. High numbers don't spike you the same way. Low numbers don't collapse you the same way. You're learning to stay with the information without becoming it. That separation is powerful. It allows you to think clearly without detaching emotionally, to care without clinging, to plan without gripping the outcome. As this continues, your sense of self becomes less entangled with financial performance. You don't disappear when things slow down. You don't inflate when things accelerate. You remain. And remaining present is what allows consistency to form. Consistency is not about doing the same thing repeatedly. It's about operating from the same internal state across changing conditions. That's when money stops feeling unpredictable and starts feeling responsive. You may also notice a refinement in your desires. Not everything that once felt exciting still does. Some ambitions fall away quietly, others deepen. This isn't loss, it's clarification. When desire aligns with capacity, it stops feeling restless. It feels focused. And focused energy moves differently than scattered energy. Money follows that difference. Not immediately, not dramatically, but steadily. You begin to trust processes over impulses, timing over urgency, structure over strain. And those preferences aren't learned intellectually, they're felt. Your system knows when something fits. Now, this is why the relationship with money begins to feel more collaborative than adversarial. You're no longer trying to extract certainty from it. You're working with it as part of a larger internal order. And that order doesn't rush. It stabilizes first. It strengthens quietly. And only then does it expand. As this stability deepens, many people begin to notice changes in places they weren't expecting. Not in bank accounts yet, not in numbers, but in how they wake up, how they think, how they relate to silence. There's often a subtle reduction in background anxiety, the kind that used to sit beneath everything, quietly influencing decisions. It doesn't disappear overnight. It simply loses its authority. And when that happens, money stops being the unspoken concern behind every choice. You may notice moments where you're no longer mentally rehearsing worst-case scenarios, not because you're optimistic, but because your system no longer needs to stay braced. That constant internal vigilance begins to soften. This is an important stage because vigilance has always been expensive. It consumes energy. It narrows perception. It keeps the system in preparation mode rather than participation mode. As vigilance fades, participation becomes possible. You begin to experience money-related situations with more neutrality. Meetings, conversations, decisions. They carry information, not threat. And information can be worked with. This is also where your relationship with effort changes. Effort becomes more precise, less scattered, less compensatory. You're no longer trying to outrun uncertainty. You're moving in relationship with it. That shift alone changes the quality of your actions. Actions taken from regulation tend to be fewer but more effective. They don't need constant correction. They don't create as much cleanup afterward. They fit. You may notice that you're less interested in chasing intensity. Big wins, big risks, big swings lose some of their appeal. Not because you're shrinking, but because your system no longer confuses intensity with expansion. Expansion feels different now. It feels like capacity widening, like breath deepening, like range increasing. Money aligns with that kind of expansion far more naturally than it does with force. You may also notice that your relationship with control begins to change. Control loosens its grip. Not because you've given up responsibility, but because responsibility no longer requires tension. You trust yourself to respond, and that trust reduces the need to anticipate every outcome. This is where flexibility emerges. Flexibility doesn't mean unpredictability. It means adaptability without self-betrayal. It means staying aligned even when conditions shift. Money responds well to flexibility because flexibility keeps you in relationship with reality rather than locked into expectation. At this stage, many people notice a quiet confidence forming. Not the kind that seeks reassurance, but the kind that remains steady when reassurance isn't available. This confidence isn't about knowing what will happen. It's about knowing you'll remain intact while it unfolds. And that changes how you hold money, opportunity, and uncertainty. You stop trying to extract guarantees from the future. You stop demanding certainty before movement. You stop postponing alignment until conditions are perfect. Instead, you move from coherence. Coherence is when thoughts, emotions, and actions are pointing in the same direction, and coherence has its own momentum. Money moves differently around coherent systems, not instantly, not magically, but sustainably. This is why, at this stage, things may feel uneventful. No dramatic breakthroughs, no obvious turning points, just a steady sense that you're no longer fighting yourself in the process. And that internal peace is not separate from financial movement. It's foundational to it. There's another layer that often appears right here, and it's rarely discussed with honesty. The layer of receiving. Most people think they have a money problem when what they actually have is a receiving problem. Not because they don't want more, but because on a deeper level, their system doesn't feel safe holding more without consequences. Consequences can be subtle: attention, expectations, responsibility, the fear of losing it, the fear of being judged for having it, the fear of being judged for wanting it. So even when the mind says, yes, I'm ready, the body may still be protecting an older identity that believes safety lives in staying just below visibility. This is why money can feel inconsistent for so many people. They build, they earn, they improve, and then something inside them quietly pulls back. Not consciously, not sabotaging on purpose, just regulating, because the nervous system doesn't ask, what do you want? It asks, what feels safe? And safety is not always aligned with expansion at first. This is also where self-worth becomes relevant, but not in a motivational way, in a structural way. If your internal identity still associates money with pressure, performance, or proving, then receiving more automatically activates those associations. And when the associations activate, the body responds. Sometimes it responds by tightening, sometimes by delaying decisions, sometimes by seeking relief through spending, sometimes by avoiding opportunities that would bring visibility. Not because you're incapable, because you're trying to stay regulated. So as this shift deepens, the real work becomes quieter. It becomes learning to hold more without tightening, learning to receive without apologizing, learning to allow money to be present without it becoming a verdict on who you are. This is not about forcing yourself to feel worthy. It's about noticing where worth is still conditional. Conditional worth creates conditional receiving. You only allow yourself to feel safe when you've done enough, earned enough, proven enough, helped enough, sacrificed enough. And because the conditions never fully end, the nervous system stays in a subtle loop. Almost, but not quite. When that loop begins to dissolve, money starts to feel different again. Not exciting, not dramatic, just cleaner. You stop negotiating internally every time something good happens. You stop bracing for the catch. You begin to trust that expansion does not require punishment. And that trust changes behavior in small ways that compound. You make fewer decisions to impress, fewer decisions to relieve discomfort, fewer decisions to escape pressure, more decisions to build stability. And stability, over time, becomes the most magnetic money frequency there is. Not because it's flashy, but because it's coherent. People trust it. Systems respond to it. Opportunities align with it. Because stability has a signature. It doesn't demand, it doesn't chase, it doesn't rush, it holds. And when you become someone who can hold, money stops feeling like a visitor. It begins to feel like a resource that can stay. That is a different relationship. And it changes everything over time, without needing a dramatic moment to prove it. As this recalibration settles, there's a second shift. Not in how you think about money, but in how you relate to yourself around it. Money becomes information again, not identity. Confidence becomes steadiness. Motivation becomes patience. Alignment becomes something you stop interrupting. Money begins to feel less like a test and more like a mirror. And if money feels different lately, it's likely because you are different internally. This isn't the end. It's a stabilization point. If this resonates, comment the word breakthrough below. And subscribe, because the next video builds directly on this one, showing how this internal alignment begins to translate into external financial structure.